My daughter said it quietly, like she was embarrassed someone might hear. Mom, while you're here, just don't mention to anyone at the shop that you're my mother. Just say you're helping out for a few days. I stood there with my overnight bag still in my hand. The cab had just pulled away. I hadn't even seen the inside of her bakery yet. What do you mean? I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's just easier. My business partner thinks I built this from scratch. He doesn't know about the loan. I don't want it to be awkward. The loan, that was what she called it now. The $200,000 I'd taken from my retirement account. The money I spent 31 years as a school nurse building. Penny by careful penny. The money I wired to her 18 months ago so she could sign the lease, buy the equipment, hire her first 2 employees. She called it a loan. I didn't say anything else right then. I picked up my bag and followed her through the back door of the bakery, and I smiled at the girl behind the counter, and I let my daughter introduce me as my mom's old friend. She's helping us this week. I smiled. I nodded. I said it was nice to meet everyone. And inside, something very quiet went still. I want to tell you something about my daughter before I go any further, because I don't want you to think she was always this way. She wasn't. Her name is Simone. She's 38. She has her father's dark eyes and my stubbornness, and when she was small she used to climb into my lap after her bath and smell like lavender soap and tell me every single thought that crossed her mind. She talked constantly. She narrated the world. I raised her mostly alone. Her father left when she was 9, not dramatically, not cruelly, just quietly and completely, the way some men do. He moved to Phoenix with a woman he'd met at a conference, and we heard from him on birthdays for a few years, and then we didn't. Simone cried for a month, and then she decided she was done crying, and I watched her build a wall around herself that was both impressive and heartbreaking. She was sharp in school, got a scholarship to a state university, studied business, graduated with honors. I drove 6 hours to sit in those bleachers and watch her walk across that stage, and I cried the whole way home, alone in the car, because I was so proud I didn't know what to do with it. She married her husband, Douglas, at 31. He's an architect, good-looking in a careful way, always dressed like he's about to meet a client, always slightly distracted. I wanted to like him more than I did. I tried. He's not a bad man. He's just the kind of man who makes you feel slightly invisible without meaning to, and Simone, who had spent her whole life feeling seen by me, seemed not to notice. They moved to Harborview 3 years ago for his firm. It's a coastal town, the kind that has wine shops and artisan cheese and people who jog with very expensive strollers. I live in Milford, about 400 miles north, close enough to visit, far enough that I couldn't just drop by. When Simone called me 18 months ago, she was crying. The restaurant she'd been managing had closed. She had an idea. She'd always wanted to open her own place, something smaller, a bakery. She knew the clientele in Harborview. She knew what they wanted. She had a location. She had a concept. She had plans. What she didn't have was money. Douglas's firm was going through a slow period. They'd stretched themselves thin on the house. She wasn't asking, she said. She just wanted to tell me. How much? I asked. She told me. I said I needed a few days to think. I didn't need a few days. I knew before I hung up the phone. She was my daughter. She was 37 years old and she was scared, and she had never asked me for anything like this in her whole life. I called my financial advisor. I understood what I was doing. I was 64 years old. I had just retired from the school district after 3 decades, and I was pulling $200,000 from the account I planned to live on. My advisor wasn't happy. I told her I'd made up my mind. I wired the money on a Tuesday afternoon. Simone called me that night and cried again, this time differently. I'm going to pay you back every cent, she said. Every single cent, Mom, I promise. I know you will, I said. Now go plan your bakery. The bakery opened 8 months later. I wasn't there for the opening because Simone said it was chaotic and she didn't want me to see it before everything was perfect. I understood. I sent flowers. I heard about it through photos on her phone when she called. I heard about the line out the door the first Saturday. I heard about the wedding cake order that came in the second week, and the catering contract with the hotel 2 blocks away, and the write-up in the local lifestyle magazine. I heard all of it through a screen 400 miles away. I was happy for her. I was genuinely happy. I just didn't understand yet why I hadn't been invited to see it in person. It was Simone who finally said to come. Late October, almost a year after the opening. She'd been making small payments, irregular, usually around $500 at a time. and I hadn't asked questions. The bakery was doing well. I trusted her. "Come for a week," she said. "I want you to see what we've built." I booked the flight myself. I was excited in a way that felt almost embarrassing. I bought a new cardigan. I got my hair done. I spent too long in the drugstore picking out a gift for my granddaughter, Simone's stepdaughter from Douglas's first marriage, who was 7 and whom I adored. Her name is Piper, and she has red hair and opinions about everything, and I'd missed her. I landed on a Thursday afternoon. Simone picked me up, which surprised me. I'd expected Douglas. She was warm in the car, talkative, asked about the flight, told me about a new croissant recipe she'd been developing. It felt like old times. Then we pulled up to the bakery instead of the house. "I just need to check in on closing," she said. "Come meet everyone." That was when she said it. "Just don't mention to anyone that you're my mother." I followed her inside carrying my overnight bag. The bakery was beautiful. I want to give it that. She had built something real. High ceilings, pale wood, the smell of butter and vanilla so thick you could feel it. Display cases lit from below. A chalkboard menu in her handwriting. It looked exactly like something she would have built, which meant it looked exactly like something I had watched her dream about since she was 20 years old. A man came out from the back. Tall, 50s, silver at his temples. He wiped his hands on a kitchen towel and smiled at me with the particular warmth of someone who has decided in advance to be charming. "This must be your mom's friend," he said to Simone, and then to me. "I'm Graham. Simone's business partner. She's told me so much about you." He hadn't, of course. I could tell by the way Simone's eyes moved sideways for just a fraction of a second. "Lovely to meet you," I said. "She's told me about you too." I spent the next 40 minutes straightening a stack of takeout boxes in the back room, because Simone suggested I make myself useful while she and Graham went over the week's orders. I am 64 years old. I have a nursing degree. I managed the health records for 1,200 students for over 2 decades. I straightened the takeout boxes, and I did not say a single word. That night at the house, after Piper was in bed and Douglas had disappeared into his office, Simone and I sat at the kitchen table with tea. She was relaxed in a way she hadn't been at the bakery. She asked about my neighbor's hip surgery. She laughed at a story about my book club. I almost brought it up. I had the words ready. But I looked at her across the table, really looked at her, at the tiredness she was carrying, at the small vertical line between her brows that hadn't been there 5 years ago, and I decided to wait. I told myself I wanted to understand first. The next morning she left for the bakery at 6. I stayed at the house with Piper, who was on a school holiday, and we made pancakes and built a fort in the living room out of couch cushions, and I read to her for an hour. It was one of the best mornings I'd had in a long time. When Simone came home for lunch, she asked if I wanted to come back to the bakery in the afternoon. I said yes. She said Graham would be there. "I remember," I said. She looked at me. "Mom, Simone." She shook her head slightly and went to change her shoes. At the bakery that afternoon, I met the other employees, 2 young women who baked, a young man who handled deliveries, a part-time girl at the counter. They were introduced to me as a family friend helping out for a bit. I smiled each time. I said it was a wonderful place. At one point, Graham asked me what I'd thought of the new fig and honey tart that Simone had put in the case that week. "Extraordinary," I said. "She has her grandmother's palate." I paused. "I've known her family a long time." He nodded and moved on. Simone was looking at me from across the room. I looked back at her calmly and asked if she needed help with the afternoon delivery receipts. She handed them to me without a word. I spent 4 days at that bakery. I organized supply invoices. I relabeled the freezer storage in a system that actually made sense. I redid the inventory spreadsheet on Simone's laptop because the one she had was a disaster. I answered the phone twice when both counter girls were busy, and I took down cake orders efficiently and correctly both times. Graham thought I was wonderful. He told Simone she should keep her friend around because I clearly had a head for organization. He said it like I wasn't standing 6 feet away. Simone laughed. It sounded slightly hollow. At night, we would come home and Douglas would be there, cordial and distant, and Piper would show me whatever she was working on. A drawing, a chapter book, once a very ambitious plan for a treehouse, and then after Piper was in bed, Simone and I would sit with our tea and talk about everything, except the thing we were not talking about. I thought about my mother. She died when I was 51, and one of the things I missed most about her was that she always told me the truth about myself, even when I didn't want to hear it. She was not cruel about it. She was just honest in the way that only someone who has known you your whole life can be. I wondered what she would have said to me right now, sitting in my daughter's beautiful kitchen, drinking tea in my daughter's beautiful house, in the town where my daughter was building a beautiful life that did not seem, in some fundamental way, to include me. She would have said, "You already know what's happening. Stop pretending you don't." On the fourth night, I went through my own files on my phone. Not to snoop, I already knew what I was looking for. I had copies of everything. I always do. When I wired the money, I had my own attorney draft a short loan agreement. Nothing complicated, just the amount and the terms we'd discussed. Simone had signed it. I had the scans saved in 3 different places. I also had, somewhere in my email, a forward message from 18 months ago that I hadn't thought much about at the time. When Simone had signed the lease on the bakery space, she had used my financial information as the guarantor because she didn't yet have business credit. The landlord's office had sent a confirmation to me as well as to her. My name was on that lease. Not as a co-owner, not as a partner, just as the guarantor, the person responsible if the rent didn't get paid. But my name was there in a legal document attached to the building where I had spent 4 days being introduced as a family friend. I sat with that for a while in the dark of the guest room. I wasn't angry. I was, but it was slow and deep, the kind of anger that doesn't burn, it just settles. What I felt more than anger was a grief that I didn't entirely have words for. Not for the money, not even for the humiliation of the takeout boxes, but for the fact that my daughter, my girl who used to narrate the world to me, had looked at everything I'd given her and decided that the best strategy was to make me smaller. I thought about what I was going to do. On the 5th morning, Graham came in early. He and Simone were meeting with a catering client, a woman who ran events at one of the bigger waterfront venues. It was a significant contract Simone had mentioned. Potentially the biggest account the bakery had landed. I was in the back, updating the inventory, when I heard Graham say to the client, "Simone really built this from the ground up, bootstrapped the whole thing." I put down my clipboard. I walked out to the front of the bakery. Simone saw me coming and something shifted in her face. I smiled at the client. I said, "She worked so hard. I'm very proud of her. I'm her mother." The table went quiet. Graham looked at Simone. Simone looked at me. I kept my voice warm, conversational. I flew down to visit for the week and she put me to work, which honestly I love. She's always been like that. Gives the people around her something to contribute. I paused. It's a gift. The client, lovely woman, she had kind eyes, smiled and said, "You must be so proud." "Every single day," I said. Then I excused myself politely and went back to the inventory. Simone found me 20 minutes later in the storage room. She closed the door behind her. She didn't yell. She was quiet in the way that scared me more than yelling would have. "Why did you do that?" I set down the clipboard. "Because I'm your mother, Simone. I asked you not to. You asked me to pretend I wasn't your mother in a building my money is attached to." I said it plainly, not meanly. "My name is on the lease. I signed as your guarantor. I wired you $200,000 18 months ago. I have the loan agreement with your signature on it." I waited a moment. "I'm not saying that to threaten you. I'm saying it because I want you to hear what you actually asked me to do." She was quiet for a long time. "Graham thinks I built this myself," she said finally. "I know. If he finds out—" "What? That your mother helped you? That you had someone who believed in you enough to risk her retirement?" I looked at her. "Simone, what are you ashamed of?" And that was the question. Not the money, not the lease, not Graham or what he thought. That was the real question underneath all of it, and I watched it land. She sat down on a stool by the supply shelves. She put her hands in her lap, and for a moment she looked exactly like she did at 9 years old, the year her father left, sitting at our kitchen table trying to decide whether to cry. "I don't know," she said. "Yes, you do." She was quiet. Then, "I've spent my whole career around people who came from money, who had connections, who got into rooms because of who their families were." She looked at her hands. Douglas's family paid for his whole education. His dad got him his first project. No one knows that either. And I watched him get credit for being self-made his entire career. She paused. "I didn't want people to look at me and think, 'Oh, she just had someone to bail her out.' I understand that," I said. "I do. But I'm your mother, not a bailout, not a backer, not a silent investor." I reached over and covered her hand with mine. "I'm your mother, and you asked me to stand in your kitchen and pretend I was someone else." She started to cry then, Not loud. Just quietly with her eyes down. I let her. After a while she said, I don't know how to fix it. Start with Graham, I said. Tell him the truth. The version that's actually true. That you had a parent who believed in you, and you built something real with that belief. That's not a weakness. That's a foundation. And you? I'm your mother, I said again. There's nothing to fix with me. There's only what happens next. She told Graham that afternoon. I wasn't in the room for it, but I heard the low hum of voices from the storage room for about 30 minutes, and when she came out, her eyes were red and she looked like she'd put down something heavy. Graham came and found me before I left for the day. He shook my hand. She told me, he said, I want you to know what you did is remarkable. She's built something remarkable. She has, I agreed. He nodded. I owe you an apology, too. I think I made some assumptions this week. People usually do, I said. I smiled at him to show I meant it without sharpness. That evening, Simone and I sat on the back porch after Piper was in bed, wrapped in blankets because the October air off the water was cold. Douglas had joined us for once, and he was quiet but present, and at some point he said, somewhat awkwardly, we should have done this differently. It wasn't much of an apology, but I thought it was probably the most honest thing he'd said all week, so I accepted it. Simone started to say something about the money, about making it more formal, more regular, about a real repayment schedule. I told her we didn't have to figure it all out tonight. We had time. I want to, she said. I want it to be right. Then we'll make it right, I said. Together, like we've always done everything. She leaned her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was small. The water was dark and the lights from the neighboring houses reflected on it in long yellow lines. Piper's drawing of the proposed treehouse was still on the kitchen table inside. I had already decided I was going to help build it when I came back, and I would come back, through the front door, as her mother. That part was no longer negotiable. I flew home 2 days later on a Sunday morning. The cab to the airport came at 5:30, before anyone in the house was awake, and I left a note on the kitchen counter, just a short one, next to Piper's treehouse plans. I love you both. See you at Christmas. Save me one of the fig tarts. Mom. I sat in the airport with my coffee and watched the sun come up over the runway. I wasn't angry anymore. I was something else. Something lighter and cleaner and a little tired the way you get tired after something has finally been said out loud after too long. I thought about my mother again, about what she told me once when I was going through a hard stretch in my 30s, some version of a hard stretch I can no longer even fully remember. She said, the people who love us don't always know how. Sometimes we have to show them. I thought I had done that. I thought Simone had heard it. The gate agent called my row. I gathered my bag and my coffee and I walked toward the plane. Whatever came next, I was going home as myself, and that, I thought, was more than enough.